The Nintendo 64 era was a special step into what the future of gaming can become. Make way for 3D gaming. Unlike Phineas and Ferb, it's time to experience the third dimension, and luckily for my sanity, I don't have to talk about Sonic's rough transition. There was a really cool studio out in the UK that Nintendo worked with to make some of the best games at the time. This is Rare, the creators of a bunch of Nintendo icons, both first and third party. Although ever since their first published game in '86, it took them some time to warm up and start cooking something delicious. Some of these games make me question my mortality. The Amazing Spider-Man on the Game Boy. Why play Dungeons and Dragons when we have Dungeons and Dragons at home? Time Lord, Captain Skyhawk, Narc if you're feeling a little insecure. Have you ever wanted to fuck a pirate? If she has a peg leg, we might have some problem. And to think, we were supposed to get a game called Johnny Blastoff in the Kremling's Armada in 1992. Words can't even explain my disappointment. But in 1994, our chef started cooking, and my god is it divine. The Donkey Kong Country trilogy on the SNES, GoldenEye 007, the Banjo duology, Conker's Bad Fur Day, Donkey Kong 64, Perfect Dark, even some hidden gems like Jet Force Gemini and Custom Robo, as well as other great games in the 90s like Battletoads and Killer Instinct. This was Rare in their prime, an unstoppable force. Although unfortunately, all good things must come to an end, as things got as bad as they possibly could have. I believe Rare ended their run with Nintendo on a positive note with Star Fox Adventures. Yes, it is a very blatant Zelda game with a unique code of Star Fox paint, but I think it's a solid game. But on the dreaded date of September 24th, 2002, Microsoft, the antagonist of this story, would shock the gaming world and Nintendo fans alike as they bought Rare for $375 million. Holy shit. They acquired nearly every Rare exclusive IP. Luckily for Nintendo, Donkey Kong and Star Fox stay with them, but everything else is now for Microsoft to have fun with, and this leads to a hardcore downfall that is just very sad to watch. To think we got It's Mr. Pants before Conker's Other Bad Day. Although seeing this new negative track record, they would have found a way to ruin that, so it might be best that we never got it in the first place. To me, Microsoft eliminated everything that Rare was known for. They took away all the color and passion they once had when they were working with Nintendo throughout the final years of the 1900s as we transition into the world's next millennium. In my opinion, from 2003 all the way to 2015 before Rare Replay, it seemed like their freedom and creativity was stripped away from them. It's like your favorite IP being bought out by a company and they tarnished that product that was once beloved and ruined what made said product loved amongst the respective communities. But luckily, it's not all doom and gloom. In 2018, Sea of Thieves released to critical acclaim, and in 2020 we got the next Battletoads installment after 20 plus years, bringing back one of the OG beat 'em up series. There seemed to be a spark of hope for Rare to come back one day and show the gaming world why they were once a juggernaut of a studio, but from what I know, this was the last game they would ever develop. Although there is one game called Everwild, which sounds like a spin-off franchise to Neverwinter or EverQuest. This game was announced on November 14th, 2019 and would soon get a second trailer on July 23rd, 2020. But ever since, we haven't gotten any news or trailers based on this new IP, so the possibilities of what's going on with this game is endless. Either we'll get the game in 20 years or it'll never be released. Everwild looks very intriguing, but there's very little information as to what type of game it's going to become. The environments give me modern Zelda vibes, more so Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, with more fantasy elements, and Pokemon-like visuals similar to Legends Arceus, but obviously instead of a traditional 3D art style, we got a very fluid 2D/3D hybrid animation style, although it's safe to assume that what's shown in the trailers are just cutscenes. Other than screenshots from these two trailers, there are no gameplay trailers or sneak peeks into the most important element of video games. Hopefully one day we'll get more information on this game. I do hope that if development is still going on, they're taking their time and figuring everything out, and I hope it turns out to be a great game. But enough formalities, it's time to put the hypothetical glasses back on and speculate what Nintendo could have been if they had beat Microsoft to the punch on purchasing Rareware. Jesus Christ, that's hard to say. This is going to be in a similar vein from when I talked about Sonic 06. This is going to be less grounded because we're going to be talking about a lot of different franchises here. So let's talk more hypotheticals. I have a lot of ideas as to what a good number of these franchises could possibly look like if Nintendo acquired Rare. Where would they be on the scale of importance and impact for Nintendo? Let's talk about it. We're going to start off with the greatest ape in all of video games, Donkey Kong. Kong. I love the first two Donkey Kong Country games, Donkey Kong Country 2 being my favorite game in the entire franchise. Despite me not being a fan of the third installment, this series on the SNES put Donkey Kong in a new light of 2D platformers and separated itself apart from his debut game in arcades. Donkey Kong 64 was one of many 3D platformers that was a big hit, but after the initial purchase from Microsoft, 2D Donkey Kong would be set in the hands of Retro Studios, the same studios that developed the Metroid Prime trilogy. They would go on to develop Donkey Kong Country Returns, Tropical Freeze, Metroid Prime Remastered, and they are currently working on Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. I'm happy that Donkey Kong found a new home in Retro Studios. Those games are great, although for a while it seemed like Rare would be the sole home for Donkey Kong, and I feel like alongside Microsoft buying Rare, that kind of put a halt on the whole franchise and it basically forced Nintendo to start over. I can only imagine all the ideas Nintendo and Rare had for the future of Donkey Kong at the time, other than the Donkey Kong racing game that never happened. If Nintendo acquires Rare, we would definitely get more 3D games on future consoles like the GameCube, possibly the Wii, definitely on the Wii U. I can see Mario and Donkey Kong being on the same level when it comes to their respective genres, mainly being 2D and 3D platform/adventure games. Although DK spin-offs is where the question marks multiply. Mario vs Donkey Kong, Barrel Blast, and Diddy Kong Racing possibly being good games. Who the hell knows? I know Jungle Beat was a very exclusive title because of some damn bongos, and the same thing goes for Donkey Konga. Maybe those games continue for the Wii and Wii U and are actually quality titles, but if we were to get those games on the Switch, I don't think the bongos would be able to join the fun, as we would probably be forced to use motion controls with only the Joy-Con. I'll stop talking before I give anyone any ideas. Another element of Donkey Kong I think would be great for the franchise is the characters. The further development for a ton of legacy Donkey Kong characters would be insane, as the franchise is relatively character driven with the lore and stories. Other characters that don't get as much press would probably get more notoriety and could possibly make appearances in some Mario spin-offs, but I guess we'll never know. Let's move on to Star Fox, the Nintendo franchise of all time. I would argue one of the most polarizing Nintendo franchises. The ups and downs, inconsistency, Star Fox Zero being a thing for some reason. Star Fox truly got the bad end of the stick in this timeline. I feel bad because the general concept for Star Fox is really damn cool, and there are a few gems, but this is a very what could have been franchise. Considering Rare took the helm with Star Fox Adventures, it's possible we get a more unique 3D Star Fox line of games alongside traditional installments. This could give Nintendo that extra push to have Star Fox live up to its potential. It's like they just left it behind to rot after Adventures, and then Star Fox Zero comes in and say, hey, you remember Star Fox? Yeah, us too, but for some reason we just can't come up with a unique concept for the game. It's really frustrating, and honestly I have no idea how I feel about Star Fox 64 3D. It is very difficult to determine what the Star Fox franchise would look like if Nintendo did acquire Rare, but I do believe they will be more aggressive with the series, and with Rare by their side, I think Star Fox becomes a net positive. Now let's branch out from Nintendo and talk about Rare originals. Starting off with GoldenEye, I have no idea what this series would look like if this IP was Nintendo's. I'm just gonna be boring, more games on future consoles. That is all. This same mentality goes for Perfect Dark. Generally, I don't have that much experience with these series of games, so I don't have much hypothetical inputs or ideas for them. I'm sorry. Now let's talk about a bear alongside a bird that can turn into a gun. I'm honestly surprised Pokemon hasn't done that yet. Banjo-Kazooie is one of the most notorious 3D platformers of its time. I believe it takes the general format and base of Mario 64 and expands on it big time with Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie. But what happened to the titular duo after the Microsoft acquisition is very sad. Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts is a terrible game and ruins the original image of such an iconic duo. It's an insult to even call this a Banjo-Kazooie game because it has nothing to do with the original two games on the Nintendo 64. Now with that being said, I personally didn't grow up with these games, but I'm more than aware of the impact this duology had for players at the time. I also acknowledge that it's one of the many kings of the 3D platform genre that molded the future of said genre. I believe Banjo-Kazooie becomes a juggernaut of a franchise alongside Mario, Zelda, and Pokemon. I think Nintendo would have the bear and the bird stay in the 3D platformer realm with the occasional experiment that either booms or flops. The same thing goes for Conker's Bad Fur Day, and I think we actually get the other bad day. And no, Live and Reloaded doesn't count or exist. Now this comes with a little bit of a caveat. Conker being more adult themed is the South Park of video games in my opinion. That seems like a tough act to pull fall off for Nintendo of all companies, but I think they'll have faith that their mature audience would eat it up, especially with Rare being the ones creating it, as well as how ambitious Bad Fur Day was and how great it turned out to be. Now let's go over some smaller IPs of Rare. These aren't as substantial as the previous, but I can definitely see Nintendo giving them a chance in the future. Jet Force Gemini and Custom Robo, in my opinion, are very underrated games. If we give them the Nintendo treatment, you got some very charming franchises with some Nintendo flair, especially with Custom Robo's amazing concept. Now imagine this, Narc becoming a decent Nintendo series before Call of Duty becomes good again. I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons again? A Nintendo themed Dungeons and Dragons game. Yes, I'm talking about Wizards and Warriors. I don't really care if it's blatantly Dungeons and Dragons. I have no idea. It's too easy to not compare, even though I haven't played either. At least I know what Dungeons and Dragons is. By the way, who just needs F-Zero and Captain Falcon when we could also have Captain Skyhawk? One thing I find really cool about this idea is, alongside Rare being acquired by Nintendo, they get the rights to Battletoads and Killer Instinct. Now, I don't think Nintendo themselves will be very involved with Killer Instinct like they are with most of their own first-party games currently, but Battletoads is something I can see Nintendo having a lot of fun with. I do think Battletoads 2020 still comes out the way it does, but in between 2002 and 2020, Battletoads has lots of potential in Nintendo's hands, and it seems perfect for Nintendo, especially when it comes down to tackling beat-em-up games. But who knows, I'm a delusional undead skeleton, so what the f do I know? It is impossible to tell what Nintendo would have looked like with a good number of Rare's IPs. I think it's safe to assume that Nintendo and Rare would still work together even if Rare didn't have a permanent home and just stayed independent, but all we can ask is what if. Although I'm more than faithful that we would have gotten the ever so anticipated Game of the Year in 1992, Johnny Blastoff in the Kremling Armada, the new greatest video game of all time.